Yeah, we can start.
Yes. So, good evening to all present here on our YouTube channel and the link, all the
Good evening.
students, all the young leaders. At the same time, it is my privilege to welcome all of you as esteemed panelists. It has been a learning for all the leaders in their journey, but it is also very nice to go back and see your experiences of your life, what transformed your experiences, and what we can learn from your rich experience of industry as well as your personal life. So I welcome all of you to this webinar. May I request Vansika to take it forward?
Sure, sir. Thank you for passing on the baton to me. So, hello everyone. A very good evening to one and all present here. I would like to begin by mentioning that it's truly an honor to be a part of a panel where such esteemed leaders are present. And taking the session forward without delay, I would direct my first question to Mr. Yogi, sir. So, sir, I would like to know that during your stint at Dabur, you managed one of the ugliest strikes at the Sahibabad unit. What kind of challenges did you face? And today, what would be your suggestions to the young HR leader in the world of digital workforce management to overcome such strikes?
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question. This was 25 years back, but I think the learnings are still relevant for me, and I hope they're relevant for you. Sahibabad in those days was a very troubled belt for labor unions and labor force and so on. And in that particular factory, we had a young, belligerent group of contract workers as well as regular workmen. And they had a set of demands. The promoter was extremely patient with both me as well as the union and allowed me a very open hand and a free hand to deal with them in whatever way one would have felt is fair and firm. And maybe I would start this conversation with some mistakes that I did, which is very important for also learning as we go forward. The first mistake was that the mildness in terms of the way they approached me as well as the politeness was where I perhaps couldn't read the tea leaves properly. And rather than analyzing the situation and understanding the situation in a very professional manner, I think I got a bit carried away by what they were asking for and how they were asking for. More important, how they were asking for. So here I would like to recollect my understanding of the Kaufman's triangle, where I really got stuck inside. In a Kaufman's triangle, and I thought I'd just bring that for you guys to see. You have a rescuer, you have a persecutor, and you have a victim. And when Kaufman discussed this theory in 1968, what he mentioned was that the roles keep changing. You first are maybe a victim, and then you become a persecutor, and then you become a rescuer. In this case, I think I entered the shoes of a rescuer to begin with. And things became worse. They went on the rampage. They shut off the power in the factory. And this happened not once, but repeatedly. And I must give full marks to the promoters for who said, okay, if you're going to handle it your way, but it's getting serious. So then after about 3 or 4 weeks of this drama happening and me getting stuck in this drama triangle, because it's quite obvious about who is the persecutor and who is the rescuer. Because I became the rescuer, of course, and the persecutor was the management. And the victim was these poor chaps in my mind. So I had to do some disciplinary action in terms of trying to remedy the situation. And when I spoke to them about warning them that please don't continue with this kind of behavior, I think I became then the persecutor, because I shifted from rescuer to persecutor. So the lesson that we learned from this particular exercise of trying to understand what does Stephen Kaufman talk about, 1968, and this classically fits into it, and I was just thinking about it. a few years back also, that one shouldn't get stuck in that triangle and one should break free from the triangle. How do you break free from the triangle is a challenge, because when you are in a position like that, handling IR in a situation where you're sort of, the monkey is put on your back, or you take the monkey on your back, both ways. You're very lonely there. You don't have friends, people shrink away, and line managers are very, very skimpy in terms of the support they give you. They push you away and they push the situation away, saying this is HR and IR to handle it. So I think garnering support is lesson number one. Lesson number two is not getting stuck in the racket of the Kaufman's triangle and thinking one is a hero and one is going to rescue people and so on. And the third is trying to figure out who is the victim, who is the persecutor, and having rational conversations about not being in the drama triangle with both whoever thinks they're victimized, whoever thinks they're rescuing, whoever thinks they're persecuting. So that's the second lesson that one can really take away from this. The third is that I think carrying your top management in this, in spite of their pushing you away, and garnering their support in whatever way you can is very important, because it's very easy to shove the blame on you when you're in charge as Senior Vice President, HR and Employee Relations and so on. But saying that, look, guys, you two are very important in this journey, and getting them involved is extremely, but I think that's a skill where I possibly made a mistake. So I start with your first question, or first part of your first question, as a mistake. The second, I think you asked about digital workforce. So it's a circumlocucious answer that I'm going to give you because it's nothing to do with IR as such. I saw a paper very recently, maybe in last week, that was published by IIT Bombay, done by a bunch of 4 professors who studied the placements of IIT Bombay students between 2014 and 18, more than 2,000 students. And many of them, in fact, most of them, picked up streams that were outside their core domain. The core domain means if you're a mechanical engineer, you pick up jobs in mechanical engineering. And if you are going to stray away from your domain, you pick up a non-core job according to the paper, which is like mechatronics, maybe electrical, maybe even civil or whatever. So I noticed that in this paper, most of the people who were passing out from a certain domain were actually taking some other domain. So one of the things that I could take away from this, from the insights I could get from this paper is that people want to reshuffle their choices in life with respect to a career. And the employee value proposition today lies in the center of providing the opportunities to reshuffle. There's also something very, very weird, if I may put it that way, happening in the world of IT today. In a mid-sized IT company, roughly 40 to 50% of the people who joined during the pandemic, in fact, 40 to 50% of the headcount joined during the pandemic. It's simple arithmetic. 24-25% was the attrition, the backfills being the same. It was about 40 to 50%. They never saw the portals of the company, not the IT portals. I'm talking about the lobby of the company, the offices, and so on. Why? Because laptops were shipped to their house, and you had merchandise like, water bottles and notepads and other things that were shipped to their house. So the emotional connect for HR was extremely difficult to really establish. And guess what? Now, when companies are saying, please come back from your homes, because most of these people were recruited from tier 2, tier 3 cities. And there was no question of moving out from the Indores of the world or the Raipurs, etc. So they were very happy. And when companies started saying, please come back to work, there was a pushback. There is a pushback. My HR colleagues in most of these IT companies hesitate to enforce the mandate of coming back. So the point I'm trying to make is particularly the digital workforce. And this is not a new term. Peter Drucker used it in 1952, the knowledge worker. But in today's context, I think the insights that we get in terms of what does the knowledge worker want is very serious to understand. There is a serious countervailing power. If we talk about the power of layoffs and so on, it's a misused word and that I'm using today evening for power. It's not a power, but it's a kind of a right, if you may say, because of the contract. On the other hand, the young workforce and digital is also showing their teeth once in a while by using this countervailing power and saying that this is what we want. I'll end by saying that if you cut the workforce, and this is based on a paper that I read pretty recently of about 13,000 people who were surveyed in 6 countries, into say the traditionalists and the non-conformists. Roughly about 60% of the workforce are really traditionalists. They're looking for the usual trappings, higher compensation, work-life balance, good food in the canteen and so on. But the people who are the non-conformists are looking for something different. They're looking for actually a new calling. They want to move out of Java or C++ and do something else. So HR has a very important role to create opportunities for these reshuffles by focusing on the sweet spots that these people want. And it's very important that HR understands what is it that those sweet spots are, whether it is working on a gig or not working, or being a caregiver at home informally to aging parents. What are the new requirements of these people? I'm not carried away by only the IT sector, but since you asked about digital, I'm focusing on that.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Very rightly said. And IR is for sure one of the most challenging domain in HR. But the way you have learned from your mistakes and passed them on to us is truly inspiring. And now moving on to you, Mr. Visti Banaji, sir. My question to you is, you have always been a person who followed your passion regardless of where the crowd is moving. But for the people today, it has always been a challenge to identify the passion and then to follow it. How would a young leader follow their passion and make an impact on the organizational goals?
Visti, you're on mute. Thank you for your question. I'd like to preface my answer by saying something about the authors of this book. Arvind is not only a certified coach, he is a certified gentleman. And TV, though he looks a lot younger than I do, was my teacher. So both of them perhaps have a slight kindness in describing my character, and which you have, for no fault of yours, picked up. So let me decode their language for you. When they say Visti followed his passion, what they really want to say is Visti was a bloody fool and had no idea what career to take up. As you might have gathered, false starts in physics and flying and philosophy are not the correct ingredients for making a corporate career, however passionate one might be about them. I happened to be lucky because a knight in shining armor called the TAS at that time used to accept such oddballs, but they don't do so anymore, as Satish, who was managing it for several years, will testify. So, before talking about what to do with the passion, I just want to pre-warn people that be a little more realistic than I was. If you want a career in industry, don't major in philosophy. I mean, you can keep it as a learning auxiliary subject, but that's not the direct route. So do something to improve your probabilities. Best of all would be to join an institute like SOIL, rather than do an MA in philosophy. But to come to your question after a circuitous start, I have found three things, not all of them pleasant, that help you to focus on your redirected passions once you've picked up something more realistic than I started with. So if you're a photographer, as both my friends in this, or at least two out of the three friends I know for a fact are, and you're not using one of these gimmicky tiny things where everything is in focus, then the fact that you focus on one thing, say the eyes of someone whose portrait you are taking, by definition requires that you defocus something else. That's what makes a good photo. If everything is in focus, then we know you've taken your photo with your iPhone. And it is the same in the corporate world. It's not so easy, but the fact is that if you want to achieve something extraordinary in whatever be that passion, then there is something to be given up. For me, some parts of that answer were easy. I am bad at and don't spend time on sport. I am bad at and don't spend time on religion. But there were problems in being bad at and not spending time with my family. So, I mean, my wife stepped in and my children were understanding. But the short point here is that when you focus on something, there is a lot that has to go out of focus at the same time. Second is that you have to be willing to learn from anyone and everyone. So we, of course, nowadays have a nice phrase called reverse mentoring for it. But I recall that the first GET batch which I handled in HR, it was one of those youngsters. Of course, I was also quite young then, but who was teaching me workshop technology and the principles of engineering, which is not my basic discipline, as you might have gathered. One of my line customers is a person who would permit me to accompany him on the shop floor in the first shift. So that was getting a totally different perspective. Your own creator, Anil, who was a respected colleague then, had many things to learn from, including his quickly acquired expertise in creativity. So you cannot afford to be choosy and say, in a certain situation, I will learn from someone. It's wherever you can, you just suck it up. And obviously, reading, training programs are the more conventional ones, but people at whatever level. And the third suggestion I would make is that at some stage, after devoting all this precious mind power and blood and time, you have to take stock and figure out, have you reached in that domain something which corresponds to world class? And not bought from a consultant. What you have created, whether it's a fast track scheme or whatever it is that you think you're going to change the world with, is it comparable? It may not have all the bells and whistles, but is it comparable to what a GE does? I mean, at that time, it was not so easy to benchmark. And if you haven't, then you have to demonstrate the courage to drop it and pick something else, because it's no use calling something your passion and being an also-ran. So I'm going to sum this up with, I have recently discovered 5 principles which I think are basic to a management, and wherever I can, I'm going to slip in one of them. I don't know if I'll manage to slip all 5 in today. But the second principle, it's called the U mantra, and I think it's very important when you are following a passion and getting all kinds of advice from what can be done and can't be done. And the U mantra says, unanimity is useless. So if you are seeing everyone else do something, you can be almost certain it is wrong. And if you follow it, you will be an also ran. That's not the way to pursue a passion. I'll stop with that. Thank you.
Very rightly said, sir. I would agree that our generation should definitely learn to, in order to get something, you have to give up something. And there should always be willingness to learn and to always to take a stop and measure your success. So moving on, I would direct my third question to Satish, sir. So, sir, my question to you is, during a stint at SAIL Rourkela, you had to deal with a situation related to the death of a contractual worker, where you mentioned that you had to deal with your own principles and mental confusion. What would be your advice to the leader in such a situation?
Well, I mean, first of all, I am loath to shower advice as I don't feel too much of a legitimacy to be on that pedestal and spray even solicited advice on life and things. But I'll share with you what I went through and what I have tried in the moment when that incident happened, on reflection and over time, to draw from that experience and my reflections lessons that have some value in living my life or going forward. And maybe that's a journey that could be of interest to the young leaders who have opportunities to encounter such experiences. So the facts actually are, except to place people who are listening on the razor's edge of the dilemma, are actually irrelevant. But the experience of that dilemma is, and to me, it was a situation where, and it was not a contract worker, it was a recently recruited senior operative trainee. And the background was that he had been coming. I was the gatekeeper for the 40,000 worker factory, which recruited these SOTs who, once they qualified, they were piled up in a line at the gate in front of the admin office and waited for months and years sometimes to be appointed to the job that they had been selected for. So this young senior operative trainee had, after a year of coming and shouting slogans in my office, around my office area, etc., negotiating, trying to push for numbers and all, finally been appointed. And so there was a more than nodding acquaintance with him. And he was deployed to a place called the Blooming and Slabbing Mill, which is a very high temperature space in which large chunks of steel are immersed at a high temperature to be shaped into something that can be used by factories. About 1600 to 1700 degrees centigrade. And he was operating there. He was found charred to a ash inside one of those units. And a suicide note, he later discovered, was on the control panel where he was working. So the edge of the dilemma for me was, our regulations did not permit any compensation or any benefits in the event of a person taking their own life at work. And knowing a bit about the background, suffice it to say, this young lad had got married in the last 3 months. His wife was expecting their first child. And there were certain circumstances in which he was going through, let us say, today we understand it better, stresses and strains that were fracturing his mental well-being, not of his own making. So the dilemma was, in my mind, it was only fair and proper that he got whatever little compensation and benefit, which would never truly repay his life, but that his wife and son or daughter to be born would at least get some succor from the system. And that he deserved that, or they deserved that. The other part of me was also respectful of the system and the rules and regulations that we had in order to create a balance between chaos and order. And as a custodian of that system, as part of the management team, I had a responsibility to do what was then legal, let's say. So to me, the choice was between doing something which was right, in my view, and doing something which was right and illegal. And doing something illegal cannot be termed as right. So there is a dilemma of its own. Or on the other hand, doing something which was legal, but not right in my view. And you know, I still live with that kind of a dilemma. It actually doesn't matter what decision I took and what are the consequences or what happened, what didn't happen. But I think I can experience that razor's edge whenever I revisit that event in my mind. And my reflections are manifold. They range from reflecting on the path that I did not take and where could that have led, reflecting on the path that I did take, and to a large extent, the guilt that I felt for a long time for having made that choice. And it was a very personal thing for me. So I think you can't, invite such events to happen in your life. They will, in some measure or the other. And I'm sure in the stories of the three other panelists whom I know quite well and are dear friends, there have been similar, somewhat nuanced, razor's edge dilemmas that people have lived with. And so will many of your leaders who are listening to you and yourselves. The question is, what do you do with it? Not what did you do at that time? That, of course, will shape a lot of things that happen in your life. But what will stay with you is, what do you make of that, and how do you keep making the lessons of that event or that experience of being torn relevant to the daily work that you do as you live through a longer life? And what does really good and right mean to me? What does legal and good mean to me? And how do I deal with such dilemmas? If I, as all of us, I'm sure, have chosen to make a difference. So I'll stop there for a moment for you to digest that.
Sir, we all believe that the dilemma that you faced at that time has helped you become a better person and decision maker in today's world. So moving forward, I would like to pose my fourth question to S.V. Nathan, sir. So my question to you is, the attitude of the society towards women has always been a point of concern. And even you have your observation during your early days, and you have always been helpful to them, whether it is their education need, skill development need, employment readiness need, or whatsoever. So how do you see the changing scenario of women workforce and equality in Indian organization today?
First of all, a great question, and all the panelists before me, very dear friends, when they speak, all you have to do is just keep listening to. I can listen to them for hours. Let me start off by sharing a story. So this is a story of my mother, who was in her school. She was top of the class. So she was a She was a topper in her school. And when she did her SSLC, in those days they used to call it SSLC, my grandfather stopped her from doing her further education. And his entire view was, what will you do? Because then I've got to go fetch a groom who is even more qualified, and this will mean more in those days. There's an overhang of what do I do with people who are highly educated women? That was one. My mother was a fantastic woman. Fast forward, my sister is a Mensa member. When I say Mensa member, these are exceptionally bright people. Exceptionally bright people. They have an IQ over, I think, about some 130 odd, 150 odd. I mean, they are stratospheric levels of IQ. Now, when she finished her undergraduation, she got admissions to some of the top MBA colleges in the country. And my father said, I've got one son who's doing his engineering, another one who's again doing his MBA, which was yours truly, and the third one, I don't think I can afford it. And by the way, what will you do if you did all this stuff? And remember, in those days, we couldn't go to a bank and ask for a loan. My sister ultimately turned out to be a person who went and joined a bank. She made sure that she didn't become an officer. So she joined as in those days, what you call as a clerk. She was possibly the best clerk in the world. And she recently, she was chosen as one of the best, and etc. Why not? Because she felt that once you become an officer, you'll have to move from one place to another to a third. And a trailing spouse was not a concept in those days. And both these struck me as something very, very personal to me. I mean, I was very indignant. Can we do something about it? Can I do something in that small space that I can influence? And which is where I come in. And I make it very personal. And this is all that we can do. I'm not saying that we, all of us need to be champions, but men who are on this call today, we have a role to play. Because I think women have, by the way, twice the amount of gray cells as men. The women don't know this, fortunately. And just imagine if they did, what would happen to this? I mean, today we can bring women into the workforce. What is changing today? What is changing today is, at least I have seen in the last about 20 years, big change. One, started with a certain awareness. Then you look at a certain acknowledgement, saying that, yes, we have women in the workforce and we have a duty towards them. Then it slowly started shifting, grudgingly welcoming women into the workforce. And you move a little bit more, they said, okay, this is not enough. Because by which time, recognize that the country also was undergoing a certain transformation. How so? We had a lot of multinationals which came into India because they felt that India was a great market, and also we had to work with several developed countries where women in the workforce was something which was very well known. So there was a certain transformation that happened. And so organizations started to look at being supportive. Today, we see this as a big focus. Women in the workforce is a very, very big focus. If you look at the people who do it very well, government does it very well. Why? Because they make sure that not only they get women in the workforce early, they have certain policies, they make sure that they take them through, which is the reason why, whether you look at a Canara Bank or you look at an Indian bank at some point in time, and of course, most recently SBI, where all of them have women CMDs, because they all grew up through the ranks and the government really supported. So I see that the private sector has now taken this up with a lot of women vigor. Do we have some distance to cover? Yes. The COVID has taught us a lot of things. First, I think the men had started to realize that, well, they have a certain role to play with what is happening with women who are trying to make both ends meet. One, which is to do with work, and second, to do with life at home, being a home, taking care of home and making sure that they're working as well. So, in all of this, I see a very, very positive change. And I do believe that by the year 2030, and I'm hazarding a guess, we would have made substantial progress. They talk about 2050 as a year when there would be a balance. But the one area where we are still lacking is women in leadership, and for which we have to make sure there are people who are in the pipeline. Maybe you look at some accelerated way in which you bring, but of course, it's also fraught with a little bit of issues around, right? I mean, if you do that, then people will start looking at you and say, are you looking at a quota system? You got to balance this out very carefully. Last but not the least is we have to give a lot of confidence both within our system as also to the women in the workforce that we are with you. And if we do all of this, I think by 2050, we can do this a lot earlier. So I'm going to turn this back to you.
Sure, sir, very rightly said. And we all know that such stereotypes exist even today. But the kind of contribution leaders like you have made in the society will definitely help reshape the mindset. So now I'll pass on to Ruchita to take the webinar forward.
A very good evening to all of you, sir.
Good evening.
It's truly a very privilege to share this platform with the top HR leaders of the country. So my first question is to Yogi Sriram, sir. Sir, you were only 30 years old when you accepted the responsibility as CHRO in Sriram Refrigeration Limited. How did you navigate to improvise the processes and structures to improve the overall impact of organizational output?
Thank you. First of all, I would like to talk about the stint I had in NTPC for about 7 years before I joined Sriram Refrigeration, because I think the foundations of my career in terms of understanding, sculpting policies, having a process mindset were during those very formative years when I was in NTPC. Unlike these days, and maybe I'm wrong, those days joining a public sector was actually a pretty good option, especially if it happened to be a public sector that was emerging to be a Maharatna, which NTPC is today. So I think the processes that were there in a public sector like NTPC taught me a lot, whether it was learning and development processes, appraisal processes, even things like affirmative action. One may, say, why should you know about every 8th position in a roster to belong to a particular caste, every 16th position in the roster belonging to a tribe? But that teaches you about the importance of what the Constitution says in terms of reservations. One may wonder why you have so much of rigmarole when you set up a selection panel, and then you have something called a panel of selected candidates, and you have to go strictly as per that panel. So I think the process discipline, which a company like NTPC or a public sector company like SAIL, where Mr. Pradhan worked, is extremely important. And that foundation really was very useful for me when I joined SRI or Sriram Refrigeration. So when I joined Sriram Refrigeration, it is not as if the company was chaotic in terms of processes and so on. First of all, I think there was a willingness to sharpen the processes, both in the head office, which is in Kasturba Gandhi Marg, Delhi, and also the factory, which those days used to be in Hyderabad. And I was given an absolute free hand. And at this point, I'd like to also share the importance in the HR function of having supportive bosses. I think it's this is a debatable point, but it may be a matter of luck, or it may be a matter of destiny or karma, whatever you want to call it. But I think supportive bosses are extremely important. And I've been super lucky throughout my career, including now, to have very, very supportive bosses, including bosses who would occasionally tolerate a maverick like me sometimes when I propose things that looked atrocious. So there too, in Sriram Refrigeration or SRI, I'd like to take the name specifically of Raj Pandit, who's now in England, and the late Siddharth Shriram, who supported me no end in terms of installing processes and installing policies, which we thought was appropriate. And one of the things that perhaps was very interesting was getting into crafting a sales incentive program, because we had a large sales force those days, and making sure that it works both mathematically as well as in terms of motivating people. May sound mundane these days, but it was a great experience. And I think the very practice of setting up sound processes made one go into detail. So the devil is in the detail in HR. And I think the habit of detail was set in NTPC, which was translated to Shriram Refrigeration. The other thing is, this is what, in 1984, 85, I think, that no one heard about the word digitization those days. Or maybe it had a different shape and form. I mean, all we did was work with a DBase 3, which was a software made by Ashton Tate. And the other was Lotus 123, which we used to muddle around with and try to use for performance appraisals and keeping the records of people and so on, so that you don't have heaps of paper. The management was extremely supportive. The bosses were very supportive about this. And we had an opportunity way back at that point of time to really install processes that were digitized, which was appropriate for those days. I know we are running a little short of time, so I'll be a bit crisp with this answer and pass on the baton to the next person.
Thank you so much, sir. It was very insightful, and we got to know how important is it to have management and supportive bosses. My next question is to Mr. Visti Banaji, sir. Sir, you had set up an industrial engineering cell and went on to attempt analysis to make senior level promotions more equitable and substantial. Obviously, it wasn't for gaining popularity. Instead, it was for bringing fairness in the system. Would you like to share your experience of dealing with it?
Sir, you are on mute.
Happy to speak about this, but I see this not so much as an contribution to fairness, which is very, very important. And if we have time, we'll talk about it. As much as to revitalize a moribund department. And for that, I must step back a bit to give you the background. The manpower planning cell in Telco's corporate office, Telco being what is now Tata Motors, had at one time a truly glorious leadership. People like Arun Maira, who I'm sure you've heard of, led it. And because of his contribution to the leadership capabilities at very senior levels, things moved almost like magic. It was a personalized touch. But by the time I stepped into that role, it had become a paper-pushing, almost governmental department. Requests came from the plants. They were put up to the chairman. He said, no, you typed a nice letter, and they went back. I decided there were two ways to break out of this peripheral role and convert this cell into a genuine corporate HR function. The first part was to create, and I've still not reached the items you spoke about, was to create processes and initiatives which were quite unusual. They are part of what I considered then, and some of them were commercially marketed later as well. So they proved their quality. I'll just name three of them which had to be sold, because this was not a department till then which either had the right to impose its authority nor was it expected. So there was a degree of surprise. When we launched a fast track scheme, which, as I mentioned later on, became commercially sold by my company to others in Tata's, we launched what was a totally new way of looking at sourcing rather than the traditional engineer or engineer MBA combination, which at that time was king, especially in an engineering firm like ours. So that was an officer training scheme, and it totally changed the complexion of our attrition. So these are some of the answers to the Great Resignation, systemic answers, not the kind of apply butter on each candidate kind of things we hear. And we created also a scheme for what now goes as a engagement surveys, unheard of in those days. We used to call it organizational assessment. And those were designed based on study of what was happening as best practice elsewhere. There were no consultants. So those were recognitions we got that we were capable of adding value beyond pushing paper. But then came to the issue of pushing paper itself. After all, you continue to get requests for additional manpower, promotions, and so on. Those were converted into opportunities for change as well. So the IE part was an adjunct to using requests for recruitment for enhancing productivity. Ours was a 50-plus-year-old company in manufacturing, traditional locations. A lot of flab had gathered. So the IE part was just a means of moving towards a slimmer organization. And by the way, we did that without any of the great traumas that we are seeing around us. We moved from 36,000 people to 25,000 people over a period of time without any VRS. But to ensure that the process of slimming did not hollow out the skills and craftsmanship for which this company was well known, there was also, and I'm supplementing one more thing which did not emerge in your question, was how do we keep a core of technical proficiency at every single level? And for the craftsmanship itself, the flagship scheme was our master craftsman, very dear to our chairman's heart and to mine, as well as several others. I won't belabor the point. The point is that if you are doing productivity improvement and slimming, don't allow yourself to get hollowed out of the capabilities you need. And it was in the same light of flab and productivity, flab reduction and productivity increase, that the managerial promotions, which were otherwise just mounting year after year. David Graeber has written a nice book on bullshit jobs, where he talks of the fact that through all this slashing of people at the operative levels, managers have not applied that lesson to themselves, and managerial levels continue to grow, and there are more bullshit managerial jobs than at the operating levels. So that had to be handled very sensitively, and your point about popularity comes in there, because it is the power of the unit head which is demonstrated in his, there were no hers as unit heads then, ability to deliver promotions for his loyalists at least, if not everyone else. And therefore anyone questioning that was worse than Satan. I shouldn't say trick, but the method of doing that was to create impartial or not individually linked criteria, which were both simple as well as robust. Again, time will not permit me to explain them, but over a period, we at least stopped further fragmentation of managerial jobs. And there was a limit to how much individual animosity could be brought to bear because the principles were debated and accepted by everyone, and then they were just applied. So that's the way, one way to get over. For example, and I just want to add, since you mentioned fairness, one way to implement or raise the level of fairness in an organization is to have a fair organization code, which the organization signs on at a time when there is no pressing case. Because when there is a case and you want to take a decision, you will find all kinds of questions and interpretations. But if in times which are stable and sober, if you've got the code through. So it was the same principle applied to managerial levels. And I think we succeeded there as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your thoughts. My next question is to Mr. Satish Pradhan, sir. Sir, you have always given priority to learning and development. At your stint with ICI, you took a lot of effort in setting up the Learning and Development Center. Could you share some of your experiences of setting up such a system and making it effectively work and yield desired results?
Well, first of all, it wasn't a center that I set up. It was an approach, and taking that approach to market. It had the earliest that I'm aware of instance of a technology backbone on what at that time was the equivalent of cloud and magic, called Lotus Notes. And it was about setting up the development activities in a large part of the established company as a legal entity, which was a business enterprise called ICI Learning. So it also gave me a taste of running a business. I think the detail would take a lot of time to talk about, but I'll share with you the principles that I practiced and some of the things that I learned in trying to do this. I think one of the first things that you probably find very interesting is there was no function called LNOD or training or learning at that time. We had a few scattered training managers who were leftovers from the past at Wilton Castle, who looked after the various business manufacturing entities in the Northwest and the Northeast, in Lancashire and other parts, and in the distributed geographies across the world. And that was not the route through which we primarily engaged. We went through the businesses. And we went through the businesses in addressing needs which we had sponsors for. So like the point made earlier, the owners of the business need to be at least halfway inclined to the kind of areas in which you're trying to provide solutions and working with that. And so we had a community. So the three things that worked well was, A, we didn't have a department. So you didn't have anything to rubbish or rebuild or destroy or recreate. You were able to freely leverage, and we did, a network of people who were committed and passionate to development and learning across different functions. There were people who had built factories who were keen to share their learning with other people. There were people in design who were keen to do that. There were people in the deep end of organic and inorganic chemistry who had spent years in labs who wanted to share that learning. And there were people in functions like finance and sales and marketing who, so you actually quickly cobbled together a community. And the anchor of that was the purpose of the task for which we were mobilizing. And that had traction with these people. a sense of community and connectedness amongst each other. With me, I mean, this we are talking about 150 people who had no hierarchical relationship with each other. I had no power to tell somebody, go to hell, or I'll spoil your rating, or I'll give you a promotion or anything. And delivering a significant level of capability enhancement and addressing some of the merger challenges that had come by divesting a very large part of the heavy and chemical portfolio, like urea and the large heavy chemical plants, explosives, of which Nathan has had wonderful, if not violent experience, in an explosive sense, not in a detonation sense. And replacing it with effect chemicals and specialty chemicals, which were, so if Nathan was involved in a business that sold in tons, the new businesses that had come in on the exit of explosives was you added a few grams of orange flavor made in Narden to a whole shipload of some pasty combination of alleged fruits to make it smell like oranges. So that was the kind of, and the lesson again I said was mobilizing for purpose, building a community, relationships within the community and with me, and a bit of a absence of a headwind from the business side. I wouldn't say a strong tailwind, but at least there was no headwind. That these were the combination of things that we tried to create and were blessed with, and therefore made a significant difference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. It was great to hear from you about this after reading just a brief version of it from the book. My next question is to Mr. S.V. Nathan, sir. Sir, your experience at ICI India highlights the leadership dilemma in terms of upholding individual values, organizational values, and actual organizational practices. How should young HR leaders deal with such dilemmas?
So, without sounding making it sound very big or of some sort, I'll simply give you an idea. So here was the situation. We had to downsize. When you downsize a very large establishment, the pain is felt. It's not like the pain is any different. But in a smaller establishment, in a factory, where everybody is dependent on just that salary that's going to come at the end of the month, and there you're going to be telling them that you're going to be out of a job, is very, very difficult. And as a young factory personnel manager, I was given the task of going and saying, okay, make sure that about 20-25% of the people just go, because if you didn't do this, the factory would capitulate. Well, the task fell on me. There was a voluntary retirement scheme, and that was executed, and people left. But there was something that was always gnawing me. I felt that this was not right. There was a better way of dealing with this. And I had tried my best, and perhaps in hindsight, I felt I should have spoken a little bit more, let's say, vociferously and getting my points across. But then, be that as it may, at the end of the year, there was something that happened where my boss called me and said, you've done an outstanding job, and here is something which is like the top increment because you did a very successful VRS. I took that letter, went to my room, and I was crestfallen. I said, are you going to do this for me? I mean, I'm already in pain because I've just let go of people. And then on top of this, you do this to me. So what I did was 2 hours later, I presented him another letter. I said, thank you very much, but no thank you. I would want to terminate my services with this firm. I left ICI. I left ICI not because, I mean, there were many other things, but this one was something that it always stayed with me. Similarly, fast forward, another organization, which is in the software area, I'm not going to tell you what the name is. Y2K, was a very, very big problem. Yogi knows it, Satish, Visti, all of us have been through all of this. And it was a big hump to get across. And we needed all the minds out there. And I was busy hiring like there is no tomorrow. And we had to put together something like about 3,000 people. And at short notice, I remember going to every single place and hiring these people and bringing them on board and training them. And we did all kinds of things. Y2K came, Y2K went, and we crossed over. Everything was perfect. The clients were very, very happy. And the owner of that particular establishment and called me and he said, "Hey, Nathan, fantastic. By the way, I had shares. And the shares are going to be vesting on the 5th of November. And on 27th, I told my dad that, hey, on the 5th of November, just 1 week from now, we're going to make a ton of money. I don't really have to go to work. This is etc., etc. And we are going to be on cloud 9. My dad said, Ani de beta, let it come. On the 30th, I was told by my boss that you have to get rid of 2,000 people. And I was pleading with him. I said, it doesn't make any sense because all these people are people that we have got from AS400. They are people who have the best systems. All we have to repurpose them, we can use them. No, it just didn't cut ice. I walked out on that organization. And when I came away, my boss called me, the owner called me and he said, do you know that you're moving away from a lot of money? You have left money on the table. And how was I to tell him that that was all blood money? And I didn't want it. So therefore, my only thing to all our young people on the call is, I think it's very important to follow your heart. Your moral compass is far more important than any other thing. If there is something that you feel very deeply, it's better to follow your heart than to stay in a place where you keep feeling that, well, you've done something wrong. Back to this ICI example, I spent a lot of time making sure that all those who got displaced got jobs. And then I said, yeah, I think now I'm at peace. So follow your heart. And there would be processes. But if there is something that you've been asked to do, which is completely against what you would want to do in your life, stay the course. Don't do it. Not worth it. Back to you.
Thank you so much, sir. It's really amazing.
Excellent, Nathan. Can I
Leaders
just
like you.
add a icing to the cake? I think one of the lessons that Nathan and people like him have shared with us is that intent alone is not enough. You have to garner agency to deliver to that intent. And it may not easily be visible to you that you actually do have the agency. Wonderful, Nathan.
May I also add, of course, my very great admiration for what Nathan did. I could not restrain from clapping halfway through. But you will find in the last paragraph of my column, which appears tomorrow or day after, something which will, I think and hope, appeal to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Visti. We're looking forward to that. I can tell you one of the greatest treasures in my life, which I have in my house, is a very small replica of a soldier with, with a sword. And it was something that the union presented to me. And many of these guys had got displaced. I'm still in touch with all the union leaders out there. I just feel so emotional about the whole thing. But thank you, Visti. I'm looking forward to what you have written. Thank you.
So I think Dr. Jha got disconnected. So once again, sir, thank you everyone for being here. And on behalf of Soil as well as Anil, sir, we are truly honored to have you all here. And we actually look forward to having you on campus and have a live discussion in person. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All the best. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Nice listening to all what our co-panelists also spoke about. Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, sir.